You weren't born to absorb suffering. You were trained to do it, conditioned by caregivers, cultures, and systems that rewarded your emotional hemorrhaging, hesitated at your silence, and punished your boundaries. So you learned to bleed mentally, to feel too much, to fix the world with your gut. But now the illusion ends. You are not an empath. You are an initiate, entrusted with blur and boundary, but trained into emotional slavery. Your sensitivity was marketed to you as spiritual merit, your compassion weaponized for others' comfort. Your fear became a default state of martyrdom, masked as virtue. The result? Not heightened consciousness, but emotional colonization. Now the initiation begins. This is Cyphoria, not the pleasant fantasy of being spiritually gifted, but the raw awakening that comes when you recognize how deeply you were trained to surrender. You see that mindset must shift from martyr to sovereign. You realize belief is not self-sacrifice. It's fidelity to your own internal line. No longer do you lie awake apologizing for feeling. You clear the resonance. You train yourself again, this time in sovereignty, not servitude. Clarity arrives in brutal flashes. You see patterns of rescue in your childhood. You trace cycles of emotional exhaustion across relationships. You realize trauma didn't make you compassionate, it made you complicit. Vision emerges, not a charity campaign framed as healing, but a reclamation of emotional autonomy. You envision a spirit unbound by emotional hemorrhage, capable of empathy without emotional death, firm in boundaries, free in presence. Purpose becomes radical, not caring, but guarded compassion. You still feel deeply, but you no longer suffer harshly. You become the emotional gatekeeper, not the endless spillway. Discipline turns protective. Cold morning rituals to recalibrate. Energetic zoning to border code your psyche. Shadow sessions fueled by Carl Jung's work to reclaim disowned suffering. These practices are not indulgence, they're resistance. In action, you stop saving broken people with your emotional reserves. You stop being the go-to confidant for predators disguised as wounded. You still hold space, but now you enforce terms. Your loyalty shifts from others' chaos to your internal kingdom. Gratitude becomes recovery. You don't say thanks for opportunities to be drained. You say thanks for seeing the patterns, for learning to withdraw. You thank yourself for choosing your own polarity over endless rescue. Adaptability becomes grounded fluidity. No longer do you absorb emotions. You transmute them. You move through emotional territory without bleeding, shielded, anchored, present. Resilience becomes regeneration, not just rebounding, but reclaiming your selfhood. Every moment your boundaries were invaded becomes data. Every time you felt responsible for emotions that were not yours becomes blueprint. Learning is initiatory embodiment, not empathetic exhaustion. Jung becomes mentor to a soul in reclaiming its pulse. Nietzsche becomes fire to transform oversensitivity into strength. Huxley becomes alarm to reject cultural martyrdom masquerading as compassion. You walk into rooms not as a sponge. You enter as water, a conductor, not a container. You no longer dissolve into others' suffering. You translate it holding its energy without internalizing its ownership. If evil manifests, you face it, not fall into victimhood. You strike not out of anger, but from alignment. You dismantle manipulation with quiet authority. You are not here to rescue. You are here to preserve. Your emotional real estate is gold not to be mined by every wounded voice. Now rise. Free yourself from martyrdom's myth. Regain your interior sovereignty. Stop wearing empathy as an identity. Start wearing it as skill. Smile with compassion. Speak with boundary. Heal with clarity, not absorption. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you're choosing to feel your own again. Now live like it. You were never an empath. You were trained to feel their pain and to starve your own soul. Now the myth ends. Sovereignty begins when you reclaim the emotional territory you surrendered to protect others. Stop absorbing suffering like a riverbank eroding under floodwaters. Become the river fluid, boundary conscious, resilient. Your mindset transforms. No longer a martyr, you become the guardian of your own psyche. You anchor in truth, not codependence. You rescue yourself before attempting to rescue others. Your belief evolves. Empathy is sacred, not servitude. Your energy is not an open invitation. It's a vessel protected, sacred, chosen. Your clarity sharpens. You recognize the patterns. You map the emotional vampires, the gaslighters, the codependents. You dissolve illusions, not people. You hold mercy, but not abandonment of self. Your vision intensifies. You no longer heal through sacrificing yourself. You heal through standing unbroken. You see a world where compassion is strong, not bleeding, where empathy holds instead of collapses. Your purpose becomes courageous boundary. You feel deeply, but you don't drown. You offer connection, but not at the cost of your core. You hold the line between authentic giving and emotional hemorrhage. Your discipline is disciplined armor. Cold showers to reset sensitivity, grounding rituals to recalibrate emotional resonance, shadow journaling to release old codes of martyrdom. These are not self-help, they are soul defense. Your action becomes accountability. You don't enable trauma to relive itself. You don't stay when they demand your gift without reciprocity. You still lead with empathy, but only behind gates you set. Gratitude transforms from martyr's sacrifice into warrior's witness. Thank the pain that taught you limits. Thank the compassion that became clarity. Thank the awakening that refused to numb you. Adaptability recalibrates your empathic edges. You still feel deeply, but you don't collapse. You translate energy without absorbing it. You hold your core as your compass, not other people's emotional storms. Resilience becomes regeneration. You no longer bounce back, you rise anew. Every invasion becomes intelligence. Every broken boundary becomes a lesson etched in fiber. Learning deepens. Jung becomes not just theory, but mirror, revealing where you surrendered power. Nietzsche's courage becomes infusion to wield your sensitivity as strength. Huxley's warning becomes liberation from sentimental slavery disguised as virtue. Walk into rooms not as sponge, but as tempered water. A conduit, not a container. You don't dissolve into healing others. You channel real transformation without surrendering your sovereignty. You are not their safe space. You are your own sovereign space. Smile with compassion. Speak with clarity. Hold with firmness. Heal with presence, not pity. You weren't born to wear others' wounds. You were born to align your own spirit, to guard your inner domain, to feel without sacrificing your flame. This is your final warning and your liberation. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you choose to feel your own with discipline, clarity, and sovereignty. Now live like it, because the training is over. And now the initiation begins. You were never meant to carry the weight of others' suffering on your bones. You were meant to feel your own so deeply, so completely, that nothing can erase your presence again. Rise, but not as they programmed you. Rise as the sovereign, not as a martyr, not as a sponge, not as someone waiting to be spoken for, but as someone who speaks truth without begging, who feels deeply without bleeding out, who loves fiercely without being possessed. Here's how you activate your sovereignty now. Your mindset is boundary, not avoidance control, not hardness discernment. Your belief is allegiance to your inner decree. Compassion has limits. Serving yourself is sacred. Self-abandonment is not empathy. Your clarity doesn't align with chaos. It dissolves it. You see clearly, not through others' pain, but through knowing your own. Your vision is grounded in presence. You reshape influence, not to rescue, but to share power with those who respect your access. Your purpose stands firm, to hold space that honors both feeling and sovereignty, to give not from emptiness, but from an unshakable core. Your discipline is internal sovereignty in action, not grind for approval, but ritual to rescue your own energy. Your action is not reaction, it's response. Every word calculated, every gesture intentional, every insight you offer comes from integrity, not obligation. Your gratitude is not for martyrdom. It's for the awakening, for reclaiming your edges, for the clarity of not being weaponized. Your adaptability is tactical. You feel empathetic territory, but you never merge. You flow through with grace and stay anchored. Your resilience is not about survival, it's renaissance. You rise as yourself again, stronger, calmer, clearer. Your learning is embodiment, not repetition. Jung's shadow work becomes reclamation. Nietzsche's will becomes your spine. Huxley's awakening becomes your mission. Walk into the world not as a wounded servant, but as held, controlled, rooted, full. You are not here to martyr your spirit. You are here to reclaim it. Smile with empathy, but hold the sword of your sovereignty. Speak with kindness, but wield boundaries like lines drawn in fire. Heal with clarity, not chaos. Feel deeply, not to become void, but to become anchored. You were never meant to be drained. You were meant to be sovereign. Never dim your flame again. Let the world respect your threshold or it falls away. Your empathy is now your armor, not your surrender. This is the liberation of your emotional lineage. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you choose to feel your own with precision, presence, and authority. Live it, guard it, ascend in it. Then let us continue seamlessly, deeply, with no looking back. You've reclaimed the battlefield of your inner world. But now comes the final transformation. Not just to rise from the training, but to transcend it. This is where you no longer walk into a room wondering who needs you. You walk in wondering who deserves you, who respects your flame, who earns the privilege of presence with someone who no longer bleeds on command. This is when your energy stops leaking into unspoken emotional contracts. No more being the therapist, the fixer, the silent absorber. You don't translate others' pain anymore. You hold your line and let them meet you there. Because real empathy isn't collapsing into another. It's standing in your wholeness, so they remember they can stand in theirs. You are no longer the psychic trash bin for unconscious suffering. You are the mirror, the flame, the wall they can't pass through unless they come clean. Your sensitivity now becomes your filter. Not a curse, not a flaw, not a performance. Also ein System. Reading frequencies, declining excess. Not because you're cold, but because you finally know your worth. This is the truth. You were never too much. You were surrounded by people trained to offer too little. So you became a substitution for their emotional courage. But no more. You don't carry what isn't yours. You don't hold space for those who weaponize your openness. You don't medicate dysfunction with your nervous system. You draw the line. You hold the standard. You speak the truth calm, clear, absolute. And here's the most terrifying part for them. You do it all without apology. You don't owe explanations for boundaries. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't need to convince anyone that you are no longer their emotional sponge. You just are, whole, untouchable, clear. And when they ask what changed, when they say, you used to be so empathetic, you look them in the eye and say, no, I used to be trained to betray myself in the name of being liked. Now I'm loyal to my own soul. Because the truth is this. You weren't an empath. You were conditioned to collapse. And now you're choosing sovereignty. You're choosing sacred detachment. You're choosing to stop feeling their pain and start honoring your own fire. So rise. Smile like someone who owes no one access. Stand like someone who's done begging for belonging. Speak like someone who remembers who they are. You've crossed the line now. There's no going back to soft cages. No returning to emotional labor camps. No re-entering the burning buildings of codependent empathy. You're here. You are the threshold. Feel fully. Love fiercely. But never again at the cost of your own soul. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you've been reborn to feel your power. So live like it. Guard it like it's sacred. And carry it like a crown no one else can lift. The world doesn't need more emotional slaves. It needs sovereign sentinels like you. This is your final awakening. Now, rule your inner world like the royalty you always were. You have unearthed the depth of emotional sovereignty. You have dismantled martyr roles, erased dependency codes, and stripped empathy of its bondage. Now you step into something far greater, unshakable sovereignty anchored in feeling and refusal to bleed unnecessarily. No longer do you absorb what's not yours. No longer do you die behind compassion. You are the compass. You are the gatekeeper of your own soul. Your mindset is now immovable boundary, not stand still, but stands. Your belief is fidelity to your inner decree, not to reaction, but to self-rule. Your clarity pierces illusion, not to punish, but to disentangle. Your vision is anchored in presence, not rescue, but responsible power. Your purpose holds space for real connection without self-erasure. Your discipline consecrates your energy, not borrowed, not drained, but sovereignly held. Your action responds, not collapses. Your gratitude honors the journey, not the martyrdom. Your adaptability flows without fusion. Your resilience regenerates without forgetting. Your learning is myth embodied, not performed. You walk the world no longer as an empath, but as an empathic sovereign. Your presence demands not permission, but respect for the territory of your soul. If they expect you to still collapse when they hurt, if they assume they've earned access by habit, if they misunderstand your silence as weakness, you don't correct them. You reveal yourself by standing unshakable. Finally, you can say, I was never too much. I was too soft for the world that needed me as a submissive vessel. But I trained myself to be sovereign, not servile, to hold empathy, not collapse in it, to love boundaries, not bleed them. This is your final awakening, your emotional liberation, your sovereign return. Smile with open heart, but don't open the gates to betrayal again. Speak with clarity, but don't dilute your presence to make others feel comfortable. Connect with depth, but never drown in someone else's chaos. You aren't here to heal everyone. You're here to stand fully healed and offer presence from wholeness, not void. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you feel your own power. So rise. Guard your emotional trenches. Illuminate in your clarity. Hold your altar with your heart. This is your sovereignty. Now live like it every breath, every boundary, every choice. And never bow again. You've already walked the crucible. You've shattered the martyr myth and reclaimed your internal kingdom. Now arises the final, unbreakable form of emotional sovereignty, the embodiment of power through presence, not emptiness. This is your final right of return. You do not absorb suffering. You transmute it. You do not carry burdens not meant for you. You mark the boundary where compassion becomes codependency. You do not collapse in empathy. You stand clear, rooted, sovereign. Your mindset no longer listens to the plea of others for permission. It stands on principle. Your belief is unwavering allegiance to your inner sovereignty. You serve your soul, not others' emotional economy. Your clarity dissolves illusions instantly. You strip away narratives built on guilt, shame, or rescue. Your vision is presence-based power. You influence through depth, not volume. Your purpose is fierce compassion, not self-erasure. Your discipline guards your territory. grounding rituals at dawn, shadow journaling at midnight, energy audits between heartbeats, every practice fortifying your inner gate. Your action is mirroring, not fixing. When chaos appears, you respond with authority, not submission. Your gratitude bows to the power of self-protection, not sentimental sacrifice. Your adaptability sustains your core while shifting form. You remain sovereign, even in flux. Your resilience doesn't just survive trauma, you catalyze transformation. Your learning is myth-lived, not regurgitated. So now, in this final declaration, stop apologizing for your boundaries. Stop shrinking your grief to soothe others. Stop bleeding into emotional voids that were never yours to fill. You are no longer there to be their safety net. You are the lighthouse. You beam clarity and guide others to shore, but you don't carry them inside. If people respond to your presence by flinching, blinking, or demanding explanation, let them. You don't simmer down. You don't justify. You stand as someone who finally mastered the art of emotional sovereignty. Because now you feel your own power, not their pain. You hold empathy without drowning in it. You shine not as martyr, but as sentinel. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their suffering. Now you feel your own flame. And that is liberation. Rise holy. Hold your field. Command from calm. Defend your sovereignty with sacred ferocity. Smile not to please. Strike not to dominate. Live not to serve, but to be who you always were. Sovereign, sacred, unstoppable. No more martyr myth. No more emotional enslavement. Just sovereignty. Just peace. Just power rooted in presence. This is your return. This is your crown. This is your life again. Now, you stand not as someone who feels too much, but as someone who commands all the power they are. Never again bow to emotional slavery. You are sovereign, and you finally live like it. And here, at the culmination of your reclamation, you stand. The echo of martyrdom has faded. The myth of empathy as weakness is no more. You no longer collapse. You no longer serve pain that wasn't yours. You are now the portal. So verein, sacred, unshakable. Every breath anchors boundary. Every heartbeat pulses purpose. Every presence radiates clarity. You do not absorb suffering. You transmute it. You do not enable wounds to be restaged. You disarm them. You don't wander into rooms expecting invitations. You enter spaces as sovereign territory and demand respect. Your mindset is boundary. Your belief allegiance to self. Your clarity the blade. Your vision births realignment, not rescue. Your purpose offers compassion without collapse. Your discipline is ritual sovereignty. Your action, calm authority. Your gratitude honors reclamation, not sacrifice. Your adaptability flows from rooted essence. Your resilience regenerates power from trauma. Your learning is myth embodied, not performed. So rise not as they taught you, but as you've become. Radiant in boundary, commanding in stillness, unshakable in authority. Smile not to placate, strike not to terrify, live not to serve pain, but to shine with relentless presence. You're not fragile. You're feral with fragility harnessed. You're not broken. You're refined by fire. You don't bleed for others. You hold them without personal collapse. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you feel your own flame and nothing can burn it out. This is deliverance. This is sovereignty. This is your return. No more martyr myth. No more emotional servitude. Just presence, power, peace. You stand crowned. Now live like it. This script has carried you through the full arc. You began as someone conditioned to bleed empathy. You walked the thresholds of syphoria. You dismantled martyr roles and soft boundaries. You reclaimed your sovereignty. You now stand as a guardian, not a sponge. You transmute suffering. You mirror truth. You guard your flame. Your mindset is unwavering boundary. Your belief upholds inner law. Your clarity dissects illusion. Your vision serves transformational power. Your purpose holds compassion without collapse. Your discipline consecrates every moment. Your action responds with authority. Your gratitude honors reclamation, not sacrifice. Your adaptability flows without losing axis. Your resilience regenerates through pressure. Your learning incarnates myth. Now the training is complete. You are not too sensitive. You are sovereign. You embody mercy and mastery. You stand in presence, not pleasing. You speak with precision, not pandering. You heal out of wholeness, not absence. Your empathy is not extinction. It is alchemy. You weren't born to serve pain. You were born to translate it. You weren't meant to collapse for comfort. You were meant to command your presence. So as you walk from here, smile like someone who owes nothing. Strike like someone defending truth. Live like someone no longer governed by emotional debt. You weren't an empath. You were taught to wear others' wounds. Today, you reclaim your soul. Stand crowned. Live sovereign. Never bow again. So here you are. Not reborn, but finally revealed. Not cleansed of your pain, but crowned by it. Not emptied of emotion, but fortified by feeling it only when you choose to. Because now you know. You weren't put here to suffer on command. You weren't designed to carry ancestral pain like a backpack filled with knives. You were trained to bend, to soothe, to serve. But something deeper, older, truer inside of you never agreed. And that part is awake now. The part that says no, without guilt. The part that walks away, without explanation. The part that feels deeply without drowning. The part that remembers, I am not their dumping ground. I am not their psychic sponge. I am not their silent savior. You are the gate, the flame, the storm that does not break. You don't flinch when guilt knocks. You don't fold when neediness begs. You don't surrender when manipulation dresses itself in sadness. You stand, rooted, clean, whole. And this is not cruelty. This is clarity. This is what happens when a soul trained to suffer finally chooses to rise. So smile, not for approval, but because you finally love your own company. Strike, not to harm, but to restore the line that should never have been crossed. Speak, not to explain, but to declare the boundary that protects your soul. And walk, not behind them, not beside them, but ahead, because you are the leader now, of your energy, of your empathy, of your life. You weren't an empath. You were conditioned to betray your own feelings for the comfort of others. But no more. Now you feel your own truth, your own pulse, your own power, and you carry it like a sovereign, not a servant. This is your final word. Smile like someone no longer ashamed of their depth. Strike like someone who knows their soul is priceless. And live like someone who remembers they were never broken, just bound. But now you are free, and you will never bow again. You weren't born disorganized. You were born dynamic. And that dynamism is not a flaw. It's a current, a deep-running, soul-bending current that refuses to be dammed. Because extroversion isn't noise. It's signal. It's not about talking too much. It's about feeling too deeply to remain silent. You don't crave attention. You crave expression. You don't escape routine out of laziness. You dismantle it because it numbs the fire you're meant to live from. They call you flaky because your soul couldn't play dead. They called you unstable because your truth evolves. They said you were inconsistent when really you were just becoming too many things for their static minds to process. You weren't meant for the repeat button. You were made for the remix. Nietzsche said, you must still have chaos in yourself to give birth to a dancing star. They forgot that chaos is divine. They forgot that some souls aren't here to walk in straight lines. They're here to draw constellations. But the world worships stillness when it comes from control. It praises silence when it comes from suppression. It honors endurance when it means self-betrayal. And that is not virtue. That is violence in a velvet glove. Jung warned us, that which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. So what happens when a generation of extroverted souls are told that their nature is disorder? They dim, they dull, they disappear into roles. They learn to self-edit in real time, to nod instead of speak, to sit instead of move, to numb instead of feel, and the fire turns inward, now labeled anxiety, now called burnout, now medicated as a sickness that was never sickness, only suffocated soul. But here's the truth. You're not broken. You're not unstable. You're uncontained. You move because stagnation feels like death. You speak because silence feels like a coffin. You shift because every version of yourself deserves expression. And still they ask, why can't you just settle? Why can't you be more predictable? Why can't you commit? Because you were never designed to commit to confinement. You commit to truth, to evolution, to becoming the next shape your soul whispers toward. They confuse your exits with betrayal, but don't see the betrayal that comes from staying. You've tried. You've stayed longer than you should have. In jobs, in relationships, in homes, in roles. You've clenched your jaw through rituals of repetition, trying to fit into rhythms that starve your breath. And your nervous system screamed, not from fear, but from dishonor, from a deep ancestral knowing that stillness without truth is a graveyard. So you left. They called it impulsive, but you knew that was your survival. That was your sovereignty. That was your resurrection. Because you don't live in one direction. You live in explosions of alignment. This is why your joy is magnetic. This is why your presence changes rooms. Because you are presence, not posture. You don't entertain. You ignite. You don't socialize. You transmit. And when people try to confine you, they are not doing it out of malice. They're doing it out of misunderstanding. They're trying to keep your wildfire in a fireplace. But what they don't know is that you are the wilderness. Your mind doesn't work in bullet points. It dances. Your heart doesn't speak in whispers. It sings. Your body doesn't wait for permission. It moves. And this isn't a defect. This is design. So throw away their labels. Flaky? Number? You are fluid. Inconsistent? Never. You are evolving. Too much? You are finally enough for yourself. And when you no longer fear your own rhythm, they can no longer trap you with theirs. You don't belong inside a box. You break boxes just by breathing. So let the world misunderstand. Let them gossip. Let them label while they build cages for your wild. You build cathedrals for your truth. Unapologetically, uncontainably, unforgettably. You are not flaky. You are freedom in human form. You are freedom in human form, which is exactly why they fear you, because you do not bend to tradition. You do not worship repetition. You do not follow rituals that betray your core. You refuse to be predictable, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. Reverence for the self still in motion. Reverence for the truth that doesn't calcify. Reverence for the sacred chaos that precedes every act of creation. They fear you not because you're loud, but because your movement reveals their paralysis. You show them what it looks like to change without apology, to evolve without a permission slip, to live without a leash. Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your parents approve of, not who your culture permits. Not who your past predicts, who you are, beneath the shame, beneath the guilt, beneath the well-trained smile and socially acceptable script. You didn't come here to be easy to manage. You came here to awaken the myth, to remind the world that authenticity has many faces, and yours refuses to wear the same mask twice. So when they say you lack discipline, let them, because they confuse discipline with domestication. They don't understand that it takes immense discipline to honor your soul's unfolding when everything around you demands stillness, to choose truth over approval again and again and again. That's the real discipline. To know that you may be alone in rooms that praise self-betrayal as professionalism, but you still won't dilute your flame to blend in. You still won't wear stability. If it means suffocating your essence, you still won't settle, because you're not afraid to start over. You're afraid to de-slowly, in a version of life that was never yours. You move, not to escape, but to stay loyal to the living intelligence inside you that never stopped growing. And yes, that might mean careers change, friendships end, homes evolve, priorities shift, not because you're inconsistent, but because you refuse to fossilize in a structure that no longer fits your becoming. There's a word for this: integrity. You have it in yourselves, in your laughter, in your departures. They called it flakiness, but it was your soul saying, I cannot breathe here anymore. This is how it looks when someone remembers who they are faster than the world can label them. It looks like movement that makes others nervous. It looks like laughter that doesn't apologize. It looks like joy that doesn't seek permission. And yes, sometimes it looks like being misunderstood by everyone, except those who have dared to do the same. You don't need everyone to understand you. You only need you to stop abandoning yourself. Every time the room flinches, your power is not in being reliable to others. It's in being devoted to your truth, even when it's messy, even when it costs you comfort, even when it changes shape. That's not chaos. That's creation. That's consciousness in motion. That's divinity, refusing to be domesticated. You were not born to become the idea of mature. You were born to become the version of you that burns, lies on sight, that changes direction mid-sentence, because the wind whispered a deeper truth. That's not flighty. That's tuned in. You listen so well, they think you're unstable. But what's actually unstable is building a life on someone else's silence, on someone else's checklist, on someone else's wounds. And you know this, which is why you move. You move like wind wrapped in memory, like fire disguised as conversation, like a truth too alive to be tamed. You are not inconsistent. You are devoted to what is real, to what is present, to what is alive. And that changes everything. It changes everything. Because once you become loyal to what is alive in you, you can never go back to performing what is dead. You stop dressing up decay and calling it duty. You stop pretending your gut isn't screaming while your mouth says, yes, of course, I'll be there. You stop betraying the wildfire inside just to keep someone else's candle lit. And this terrifies them, not because you're wrong, but because your movement reminds them of their own stagnation. You don't hurt them. You mirror them. You reflect everything they've locked behind obligation, every instinct they've chained to calendars, every wild impulse they've labeled irresponsible. Because here's the deeper truth. The world isn't afraid of your inconsistency. It's afraid of your sovereignty. It's afraid of the soul that moves before it asks, of the voice that speaks before it edits, of the fire that acts before it gets approval. You are the terrifying thing that cannot be managed. You are the unpredictable force that shows up in full truth and refuses to wear yesterday's mask. Not because you're scattered, but because you're synced to something ancient, to something wild, to something free. Carl Jung called this process the emergence of the self, not the persona, not the mask, not the obedient reflection of society's needs, but the self, whole, undivided, uncompromised. That self isn't flaky. It just doesn't conform to dead systems. It doesn't breathe on cue. It doesn't fake laughter at shallow jokes. It doesn't show up to gatherings that drain its radiance. It doesn't answer texts when the soul needs silence. It doesn't apologize for moving on, even when the world begs it to stay predictable. Because this self knows. Flakiness is a term used by people who have chained themselves to things they hate, just to appear stable. And they project that hatred onto the ones who chose freedom instead. But you didn't choose chaos. You chose alignement. They call you unstable because they've only seen stability as martyrdom. But you are not a martyr. You are not an emotional contortionist. You are not a puppet for politeness. You are the soul that walks out of cages, even when the door is wide open. You are the one who doesn't just talk about truth. You move in truth. That's not inconsistency. That's integrity in motion. And the more you align, the less you tolerate anything that isn't fully alive. You become allergic to stale rooms, numb words, false smiles. You'd rather be alone with your becoming than in a crowd with your betrayal. And yes, you may lose people. You may lose gigs. You might lose comfort. But you won't lose yourself. And that is the only thing worth keeping. You'll stop making plans that feel like prisons. You'll stop agreeing to futures that don't honor your evolution. You'll stop dragging yourself through loops just to maintain an illusion of reliability. Because when you finally trust your own rhythm, you stop dancing for anyone else's silence. You don't owe anyone your predictability if it costs you your aliveness. You don't owe them your attendance if it costs you your presence. You don't owe them your false consistency if it costs you your soul. You owe you. You owe yourself the full expression of what is real now, not what made sense last year, not what kept them happy last month, not what your childhood conditioning still whispers is right, but what feels like truth in your lungs, in your spine, in your becoming. This is the power they can't wrap in a calendar. This is the freedom they can't schedule. This is the wildfire they'll always try to name flaky, because naming it makes it easier to ignore. But you're not here to be named. You're here to burn. And in that fire, you won't become consistent. You'll become uncontainable. You'll become uncontainable. And they will call it every name but sovereignty. They'll say you're lost, but you're actually arriving. They'll say you're unstable, but you've never been more rooted. They'll say you're avoiding responsibility, but you're carrying a responsibility so rare it terrifies them. The responsibility to remain loyal to your own becoming. This is the holy rebellion of extroverted souls. Not to speak over others, but to speak from fire. Not to be loud, to be heard, but because truth erupts when it's been buried too long. You don't seek the spotlight. You are the light. And light doesn't ask permission to shine. It just radiates. And those living in shadows mistake it for arrogance. But you're not here to be humble for their comfort. You're here to be whole. You're here to be real. You're here to remember who you were before they convinced you that your rhythm needed their regulation. So you don't conform to stillness. You don't bow to schedules that drain you. You don't measure your life in consistency. You measure it in alignment, one spark at a time, one room that lights you up, one conversation that cracks you open, one move that feels like home in motion. You are not a dropout from someone else's plan. You are a graduate of your own programming. You walked out of the school that taught you your instincts were unreliable. You tore up the curriculum that labeled your energy a liability. You dropped the mask that nodded while your soul screamed. This isn't irresponsibility. It's initiation into a life that breathes as deeply as you do, into a path that can't be tracked by Google Maps, into a truth that evolves faster than tradition can capture. Because this path, this wild, unstructured, sometimes messy, always alive path, isn't built by discipline imposed from the outside. It's carved by devotion, devotion to your essence, devotion to your voice, devotion to your holy inconsistency. You are not here to be solid stone. You are here to be sacred wind, moving where you are called, arriving where you are needed, leaving where your light can no longer live. And if they call it flaky, let them. They're mistaking freedom for fear, because fear is predictable. Fear is consistent. Fear stays in one place long after the soul has left. But not you. You move, like someone who finally realized that staying put for approval was the slowest kind of death. And the truth is, you're not afraid to start again. You've done it 100 times. Every time you left a version of yourself behind that was too small to contain your expansion. You've said goodbye to identities that felt like prisons dressed as names. You've left stage, cities, relationships, when they ask you to abandon your breath to stay, because you'd rather be misunderstood than live one more second as someone you're not. This is not instability. This is evolution without apology. So stop measuring yourself by their calendars. Stop labeling your magic with their metrics. Stop trying to prove that your movement is valid. It doesn't need to be validated. It is valid because it's yours. And that's what they don't get. You were never trying to be understood. You were trying to breathe. And now you do. Deeply, fully, without a script, without a plan, without their approval. You finally understand. Flakiness was never your crime. Trying to fit into their tiny definitions was, but no more. Now you move, with purpose, with fire, with truth. And if they can't name it, can't pin it down, can't wrap it in a box, good. That means you're finally free. That means you're finally free. Not the kind of freedom they market in slogans, not the sanitized, curated version dressed in consumerism, but the feral kind, the raw, blood on your teeth kind, the kind of freedom that burns bridges and blesses the ashes, the kind that doesn't need to be posted, explained, or branded, the kind that just is because you are. And that's the kind of freedom the world cannot contain. So they try to rename it. They try to reduce it. They try to control it by calling it unstable. They try to moralize your movement by dressing it in guilt. But let them try. You are no longer reachable through shame. You are no longer programmable through fear. You are no longer available for roles that mute your roar. You don't fear instability anymore. Because you've seen how brittle falls stability really, Ireland. One tragedy, one betrayal, one quiet moment of truth, and the whole charade collapses. But you already collapsed. You already died to every version of yourself that was built for survival. You already walked through the inferno of rejection, misunderstanding, and exile, and came out the other side undomesticated. That's why you don't need consistency to feel safe. You don't need routine to feel real. You don't need predictability to feel powerful. You just need alignment. And when alignment moves, you move. Without apology, without justification, without begging for understanding. You are not here to explain your exits. You are here to embody your entrances, to enter every space as the truth they've been avoiding, to enter every conversation as the mirror they never asked for, to enter your life not as a role, but as the myth it was always meant to become. You don't care to be liked. You care to be lit. Lit from the inside with that rare fire that doesn't flicker when others doubt it. That fire that doesn't dim just because the room can't handle its heat. Because now you know. Your presence is not an accident. It's a confrontation. with their stagnation, with their comfort, with their carefully curated versions of reality. You don't need to say a word. Your walk says everything. Your laughter breaks programming. Your gaze dismantles illusion. Your sudden departure becomes a spiritual event. Because you don't leave places the way most people do. You don't disappear out of immaturity. You ascend out of integrity. You move because your truth does. You shift because your soul evolves. You vanish from dynamics that insult your depth. You leave not because you're scattered, but because you're complete. And they hate that. They hate that you don't need to cling to something to prove your worth. They hate that you don't need to struggle to be legitimate. They hate that you can disappear and still carry your power with you. They wanted you confused. They wanted you reliant. They wanted your validation to depend on their perception. But you broke that cycle. You chose clarity over comfort. You chose soul over structure. You chose truth over tradition. And now you breathe like someone who's done apologizing. You show up because you want to, not because you're afraid not to. You stay when the space feels sacred, not because someone guilted you into silence. You commit when your whole being says yes, not because you were conditioned to self-sacrifice. And this is what they never taught you, that devotion without self-abandonment is the highest form of integrity. You can be loyal without losing yourself. You can be committed without freezing in place. You can be grounded without being trapped. You're not here to prove your stability to people who lost their own. You're here to remember that motion is sacred, that presence doesn't mean permanence, that authenticity doesn't always come with a schedule. So move when your soul says move. Speak when your fire says speak. Rest when your being says rest. Leave when your truth has outgrown the room. You are not flaky. You are faithful to the wild, holy, untamable rhythm that makes you real. You are faithful to your fire, and that fire answers to no one, not to their timelines, not to their expectations, not to their maps of what a functional life should look like, because you didn't come here to function. You came here to ignite. They'll tell you a life without structure is a life without value, but you know better now. You know structure without soul is just a prettier prison, a routine that numbs you, a calendar that chokes you, a perfectly packaged day with no pulse. And you were never meant to trade your breath for belonging. That's why your energy pulses like it does. That's why you light up in new places, around new people, in conversations where ideas are alive, not embalmed in politeness. That's why you feel dead when everything stays the same. Because sameness is not safety to you. It's suffocation. You were born with a compass that doesn't point north. It points inward. And when you follow it, you're not chasing dopamine. You're tracking destiny. Not destiny in the sanitized, goal board kind of way, but the kind of destiny that rearranges your molecules. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that burns your bridges for you so you have no choice but to fly. And every time you trusted that in a nudge, every time you said yes to change, to leaving, to starting over, you didn't fall apart. You came alive. So let them talk. Let them call you reckless. Let them call you hard to pin down. Let them say you're inconsistent. They only say that because they've mistaken captivity for character. They measure maturity by how long someone can stay in a box. You measure it by how often you question the box itself. They want your history to be a straight line, but your soul writes in spirals, in storms, in sudden leaps and sacred silence. You're not building a resume. You're building a myth, one forged in instinct, one sculpted by choice, one unfolding in real time, no template, no script, no apology. And your myth doesn't follow a 5-year plan. It follows alchemy. Sometimes that alchemy looks like chaos. like walking away from something that looks perfect on paper, like choosing solitude over surface level connection, like quitting halfway through something because your spirit already outgrew it. That's not weakness. That's deep alignment. And it's rare. And it's threatening. Because it can't be bought. It can't be bribed. It can't be boxed. This is the final truth they don't want to admit. Extroverts who've awakened are some of the most dangerous people on earth. Because once you stop seeking validation for your rhythm, you become unstoppable. Once you realize your desire for movement isn't immaturity, but a sacred intelligence, you become ungovernable. Once you accept that you don't owe the world stillness to be seen as whole, you become sovereign, no longer leaking your light for their comfort, no longer distorting your truth for their praise, no longer walking backwards through a maze. You are meant to burn to the ground. You are not here to be understood. You are here to be felt, to be experienced, to be witnessed, to be remembered as the one who refused to go numb. So let them keep their boxes. Let them stay inside their lines. Let them live for the applause of the silent and the dead. You'll keep moving, keep burning, keep breathing outside of what they can comprehend. Because now you know you were never flaky. You just needed more oxygen than the box could offer. And now that you've tasted the sky, you will never bow to a cage again. And now that you've tasted the sky, nothing else will satisfy. Not their comforts, not their compliance, not their careful, colorless containers built to tame your wild. You know too much now. You've danced too freely. You've spoken too boldly. You've become too alive to ever go numb again. They'll offer you cages dressed as commitments. They'll gift you roles carved from routine. They'll smile while they tighten the leash. But you'll just smile back, not out of defiance, but because you remember. You remember what you had to burn to get here. You remember what it cost to be whole. You remember every time you left, when it would have been easier to stay. Every boundary you drew when the world demanded collapse. Every time you stood in the fire and didn't flinch, not because it didn't hurt, but because you refused to leave yourself behind again. So now you walk like someone who's done explaining. You speak like someone who doesn't need to be believed to know the truth. You move like someone who belongs nowhere, because they belong everywhere their soul can breathe. You are not afraid of being misunderstood. You are afraid of disappearing inside something false. You are afraid of dimming down just to survive. You are afraid of dying with your truth still buried beneath politeness. So you stopped playing small. Stopped apologizing for the energy that moves mountains. Stopped editing your joy, your fire, your presence. You stopped shrinking because you finally understood the box wasn't protecting you. It was burying you. And now you are unburied. Now you are unboxed. Now you are unbroken. Not because you were never shattered, but because you made a cathedral from your cracks. So move when the soul says move. Disappear when the spirit says rest. Speak when the fire rises. Laugh when the world looks at you like a riddle they can't solve. Because that's exactly what you are. Not a problem to be fixed. A force to be felt. You are not flaky. You are freedom with a heartbeat. You are wildfire with direction. You are truth in motion. So go now. Go without guilt. Go without explanation. Go without permission. The sky is waiting. The wind remembers you. The path isn't paved because it was never meant to be. It was meant to be walked by the wild ones, by the ones who left the box behind and never looked back. And you are already halfway home because you finally remembered you were never the problem. You were the remedy. They couldn't package. The breath they couldn't bottle. The myth they couldn't manage. And now you rise, uncaged, uncontained, unapologetically you.